Hello, and welcome back to Social Distancing. Today is the 1st of May. This coming Sunday is the 4th Sunday of Easter, and the hymn that I've chosen to look at today is In Heavenly Love Abiding. So again, the reason I've chosen this hymn for this week is to relate it to the lectionary readings for this Sunday, particularly the Gospel reading and the Psalm. The Gospel reading is John chapter 10 verses 1 to 10, which is Jesus being presented as the Good Shepherd to his people. And the Psalm is therefore appropriately Psalm 23, which is possibly one of the best known passages of the entire Bible. The Lord is my shepherd, therefore shall I lack nothing, and so on. Particularly, of course, if you happen to be a Vicar of Dibley fan. Now, this hymn is not a direct paraphrase of Psalm 23. There are hymns that do that. The King of Love my shepherd is one. The Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want is another, and that's either traditionally to the tune Crimond or the more recent Stuart Townend worship song. But there are clear references in this hymn to Psalm 23. And I think the hymn as a whole can almost be thought of as a reflection or a response to that passage. The text and the tune are both Victorian. The text was written in 1850, the tune in 1898. And another thing that links both the composer of the tune and the author of the words is that they're both Welsh. And in fact, the tune is named after a hilltop suburb that overlooks Swansea Bay. So as usual, before we start singing, we need to warm up. The first step is to make sure that you are completely relaxed and thinking about having really good posture as you sing. You can stand or sit to sing. It's better to stand, but if you're sitting as I'm doing now, make sure you're kind of sat up nice and tall, not kind of slouching against the back of your chair, and allowing yourself as much freedom of movement as possible. The same things, of course, do apply when we're stood up as well. Nice tall posture, lots of freedom of movement, everything very well supported. Just thinking about a few vocal exercises we can do as we prepare to sing. We can start with a few sirens, as we did a few weeks ago, starting just with the last half of the word sing, the ng, and going right the way up and down the range of our voice, being careful not to stretch it or put too much tension into it at either end, keeping it nice and relaxed. We're just exercising the full range of sound there like this. Slightly more tuneful is to sing through a few scale patterns. So what I'm going to do is start on a note, go up a fifth, then back down, do that again, and then go all the way up the octave and another note, and then come back down. So it's quite a long phrase, so it helps to work on our breath control as well. And if we just do this to R, so it sounds like this. Do that sort of thing a few times, move up and down a little bit to stretch the rest of the register as well. I often ask my choir to sing some tongue twisters, which are really good for getting the mouth moving. If you just sing a descending scale to red lorry, yellow lorry, red lorry, yellow lorry, red lorry, yellow lorry, red lorry, yellow lorry, and get faster and faster each time, that can prove quite a challenge. So one last exercise to try is just going to be a simple pattern with the word alleluia, which goes like this. Alleluia, alleluia. So we're focusing on range, we're focusing on a nice smooth legato sound, keeping the change between the two notes of each syllable very smooth, but very precise as well, not sliding between them, moving very, very precisely and smoothly from one to the other. We'll do a few of these, starting here, going up each time. Do stop if it gets uncomfortable. Here it is, and Alleluia, Alleluia, and up. Alleluia, 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 Alleluia. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to try with this is learning the melody and just singing it through to La on each note or each where we put a syllable without worrying about the text for the time being. Try to feel a really nice lilt to this tune. I think it sits very well as a sort of one in a bar feeling, and try to phrase off at the end of each line where you've got the slightly quicker rhythm that encourages you to bring the line to a very gentle conclusion. So at the end of the first line, abiding, just phrasing off that third syllable rather of abiding. I'd say that we don't need to worry too much about the timing of the breath between each line. We've got quite a long note at the end of each line, but the important thing is to make sure that the upbeat, so all of the lines begin with an upbeat, the next upbeat and then the downbeat that follows it are on time. As long as those keep in that sort of gentle lilting one in a bar, I don't think the timing of the breath in this is too important. So let's have a sing through of the tune. La 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 So on to learning the harmony parts now. Now, the lower three parts in this hymn tune have lots of repeated notes, and this is because the harmonic rhythm, the progression, the movement of the harmony through the tune is quite slow. So we don't change chord very often, and when we do, it's often to a sort of closely related chord, so we're going to have some common notes in there. And this means that in the inner parts, the alto and the tenor part specifically, we are quite often staying on one note for quite a few successive syllables. Now this does mean that the harmony feels very, very gentle underneath these nice warm melodic phrases, but it can lead to some fairly uninspiring singing because we are ourselves uninspired by having to sing the same note again and again. And the way around this, I think, is to try and sing with a real sense of line and a real attention to the text, because if the notes aren't particularly interesting, we've still got the same words as the melody, and so we can still try and get across the same meaning, and then when it all comes together it becomes a much more convincing sound than if the sopranos are sort of really into it and communicating the text, and the altos and tenors and basses are sounding a bit bored. So we need to try and find our interest in the words that we're singing as much as the music. We also need to really pay attention to tuning when we're singing lots of repeated notes, and it's very easy to become complacent and to go flat when we're just singing the same note again and again. We can start up here, and then as we go on gradually singing the same note, it gets a little bit lower. And what we need to do there is to, each time we sing the note, sort of refresh the tuning mentally. Don't just take what you've just sung and try to replicate it, because invariably as time goes on you will lose a little bit of support and you'll lose a little bit of pitch. So instead we need to brighten the tuning each time we repeat a note, and that will help it just stay exactly where it needs to be within the harmony. So with those things in mind, let's start with the bass part. In heavenly love abiding, no change my heart shall fear, and safe is such confiding, for nothing changes here. The storm may roar without me, my heart may low be laid, but God is round about me, and can I be dismayed? So in the bass part, the tuning is particularly important because the bass underpins the entire harmony, and if the bass loses support and starts to go flat, then the other parts on top of it will kind of sink down with it. So if you're singing the bass part, it's important to keep the tuning really bright throughout. Always overestimate how big you think an interval is when you're going up, and always underestimate it when you're coming down. So for example, just looking at the end of the second line, we're on an E, then we're moving down quite a long way, but keep it nice and bright. And then on the way back up, almost overshoot it. Think that it's bigger, that interval, than you think it is. So it's smaller on the way down, bigger on the way up. Da, da, da. And that enables everything to stay nice and bright. Let's move on to the tenor part. In heavenly love abiding, no change my heart shall fear, and a safe is such confiding, for nothing changes here. The storm may roar without me, my heart may low be laid, but God is around about me, and can I be dismayed? A few more specifics for the tuning of the tenor part. There's a couple of occasions where you've got an accidental, a sharp that's taking the harmony in a particular direction, and we need to keep those very bright as well. So one of them is towards the end of line 4. There's an E sharp there in the tenor part. Da, 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 da. And again, feeling the semitone downwards, very, very small, but then the semitone back up to the F sharp a little bit brighter. So that's for nothing changes here. And then a similar sort of thing towards the beginning of the 7th line of the music. But God is around, B, A sharp, B. Feeling those very brightly as well. Finally, the alto part. In heavenly love abiding, no change my heart shall fear, and a safe is such confiding, for nothing changes here. The storm may roar without me, my heart may low be laid, but God is around about me, and can I be dismayed? So in the alto part, in line 7, there is a brief split. So you either need to plump for God is around about me, taking the upper part, or God is around about me on the lower part. It's just in that bar where it splits, so just pick one of the lines there and go with it. So we've practiced the harmony parts with the first verse. I'd now like to sing them through with the second verse, with the soprano line back in as well. And in the second verse, and in the hymn as a whole, but as we practice the second verse now, try to think about very long phrasing. Try to keep the sound of the longer notes, the minims, as sustained as possible, because the danger with this is that it can get a bit sort of bumpy and bouncy with da 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 da, and I think it needs to be more graceful than that, and it needs to be calmer and gentler. So what we need to do there is we need to, as I say, keep the vowels of each word as long as we possibly can. Leave the consonants as late as possible. We do need to work very hard at the consonants to keep them brief but unobtrusive, but still very well pronounced so that the text is clear. And we're thinking rather sort of within individual bars as the phrase as a whole, as one gesture. So as we practice the second verse now, try and keep that in mind, thinking about the lines, the big gestures of the piece, and keeping the sound as sustained as possible through those gestures. Wherever he may guide me, no one shall turn me back. My shepherd is beside me, waketh, his sight is never dim. He knows the way he taketh, and I will walk with him. So finally, before we sing, just a few things to note. The third verse of the hymn is going to be in unison. The break between the two verses, we're going to have the written length of the final note and then a full 3 beats, 3 crotchet beats before coming back in again. So we're adding in a bar essentially. So it will be da 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 da, off 1, da 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 da, like that. And the playover this time it's going to be the first line and the last line of the tune. It's important to have the first line so we can sort of remember as soon as we begin how the start of the tune goes. But then the only other line that sort of fits into the context of a playover in this case, I think, without playing the whole hymn, is then the last line. So the first and last line will be the playover. There'll then be that same gap between the verses, and then we sing the hymn. So that's everything. Let's give it a go. In heavenly love abiding, no change my heart shall fear, and safe is such confiding, for nothing changes here. The storm may roar without me, my heart may low be laid, but God is round about me, and can I be dismayed? Wherever he may guide me, no one shall turn me back. My shepherd is beside me, and nothing can I lack. His wisdom ever waketh, his sight is never dim. He knows the way he taketh, and I will walk with him. Green pastures are before me, which yet I have not seen. Bright skies will soon be o'er me, where darkest clouds have been. My hope I cannot measure, my path to life is free. My Saviour has my treasure, and he will walk with me. And maybe if you're finding things a bit difficult during lockdown, the start of that third verse can be a bit of encouragement, a bit of optimism that I think we could all do with a little bit at the moment. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you back again next week.